Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Thursday, June 6th, 2019, and today we're going to be looking at a 2020 election prediction between Senator Bernie Sanders and President Donald Trump. So, I last did one of these predictions about a month ago, and not much, to be completely honest, has changed. I'm going to talk while I fill in the map because a lot of you complained about how late I started the video last time. So I'm going to go ahead and fill in all the safe states for right now while I'm talking. And if we're looking at the overall state of the country has pretty much stayed very consistent over the past couple of months, to be completely honest with you. Yes, things do cycle through the news, but again, those things only last about 24 to 48 hours. And yeah, there are some stories that definitely do take a little bit more presence over others, but generally, there are still the same type of stories that we see, whether it's Donald Trump talking about immigration or things to do with Republicans, or Bernie Sanders or Joe Biden announcing their presidential election campaigns or taking new position on campaign issues. We see things like that all the time. So right now when we're looking at I guess the date itself, today is June 6th, 2019. This is the last Bernie Sanders versus Donald Trump prediction that I will be doing before the first Democratic presidential election debate, which is around, I believe it is June 25th or June 26th. But actually June 26th or 27th. I will be live streaming during those debates if there's like an undercard debate or just the one. But I do think that those are going to be very, very interesting. These are very early debates. I am personally not too surprised considering how early these candidates have announced, just the fact that the news media has somehow adapted to them, because generally they keep most of the things that they do the same, regardless of how early people announce the campaign. But we're about to, I think, 18 candidates in the debate stage, so that should be pretty interesting. Bernie Sanders, a very popular politician in his home state. There are many, many, many poll numbers that do show Bernie Sanders as quote-unquote the most popular politician nationwide. Yes, he is to an extent in terms of, I guess, politician, but not amongst Democratic candidates. Joe Biden has a higher approval rating than Bernie Sanders amongst Democrats, which I do think could be a little surprising because that could possibly eliminate him from the general election completely through the Democratic primary. But Bernie Sanders right now is one of the more popular politicians, but that doesn't exactly always turn into votes. Donald Trump is probably going to carry states like Arizona, Texas, and Georgia, regardless of the candidates, regardless of how likable these candidates are, because of history. These states themselves have been historically Republican states, and yes, there are changes here. Arizona recently went blue. Georgia and Texas definitely got a lot closer in 2018, but it doesn't necessarily mean that these Democratic candidates are somehow going to do what statewide candidates cannot. There's a reason why a lot of these elections were so close. It is very hard for the Democratic Party to find a candidate that can appeal to the white working class, the South, Florida, Georgia type voters, the Sun Belt voters in Texas, New Mexico, Arizona. It's just very hard to grasp that perfect candidate and throw them out there and expect them to win in all of these states. That's why they sacrifice some states in exchange for others. The Democratic Party typically does that amongst also the Republican Party. But if we're looking around, Donald Trump is probably going to hold on to a number of these states. And the states that I was talking about, Texas, states like Texas and Arizona and Georgia, those are states that I think that Donald Trump is going to carry. So I'm actually going to characterize those now. Arizona, I do think, will be the closest of them all. And my reasoning being, number one, it flipped to the Democrats in the Senate race, which was pretty surprising to me. I did personally expect it just because of the way that the data was showing in terms of early voting numbers. But it was, if you had asked me 6 months before the election, I probably would not have been so inclined to say that this one would flip and, holds or gains being Missouri and Montana. Missouri and Florida. States like that would surprise me if Arizona had flipped, but those states stay the same. Pretty interesting. But Arizona, yes, I do think will be the closest, followed by Georgia, and then, of course, Texas. That's just how the rating goes. That puts Donald Trump at 190 electoral votes. So, again, he's about 80 electoral votes away from re-election. Bernie Sanders, I believe, is 88 electoral votes away from being elected. Again, this is Bernie Sanders' second time running, so he's going to have a little bit of an uphill climb in the Democratic primary, but once he gets over that hump, it looks like he has a pretty good shot at the presidency. If you go ahead and look over at the Real Clear Politics data, Bernie Sanders actually leads Donald Trump nationwide in terms of the popular vote. Sorry about that, I dropped my microphone. But in terms of statewide voting, it doesn't exactly spell out super good news. He underperforms Joe Biden in every single toss-up state. and ties with him, I believe, in one, and that is the state of Michigan. Still good numbers, though. Not knocking him for there. It's just not knocking him there. I'm just saying that the whole argument about electability is definitely going to get brought up back again, as it was with Hillary Clinton. And as I just talked about the state of Michigan, that is a state that went to Bernie Sanders by 12% in the most recent poll. I don't think that's going to be the final number. Probably around 6-7%. That's what I think is going to go for Bernie Sanders. Right now, I'm going to put that one in the likely column for Bernie Sanders. I think that the Rust Belt definitely is going to do a little bit better, not a little bit better, a lot of bit better with Bernie Sanders as the candidate compared to Hillary Clinton. He's definitely not going to ignore these voters. He definitely paid a lot of attention to them during the Democratic primaries. Even when he was underwater in Michigan by 20% in polling, he ended up winning the very next day after a poll was taken that showed him losing by 20%. Absolutely big upsets in these states, and that doesn't always come over to general elections, and I'm not thinking that it's going to be a huge upset, but I do think Bernie Sanders is going to do well in those states, including a state like Minnesota as well. You can definitely see Bernie Sanders doing pretty well across the Rust Belt. If we look at Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, I actually am surprised they chose to put the Democratic National Convention in the state of Wisconsin instead of Texas. Texas, I think, would have been a lot better in terms of bringing out voters there and inspiring voters there, but I get it because they had lost the Rust Belt in the past, and also it would just make sense logistically for the Democratic Party. I would understand why they would choose Wisconsin, but also they could be giving up a few really good opportunity to focus on Texas when, states years like 2024 and 2028 are going to be rapidly approaching, and we're going to see how that eventual outcome goes in favor of the Democrats or in favor of the GOP. So Wisconsin and Pennsylvania are also going to join Bernie Sanders in the likely column. So now he's shot ahead of Donald Trump at 238 electoral votes to Donald Trump's 190. There are some states on here that you can already expect to go in favor of the GOP, a state being the state of North Carolina. We know that this state is probably going to be a lean state and possibly could be a likely state depending on the candidate. I think in a Bernie Sanders scenario that Donald Trump would narrowly carry the state. By narrowly, I mean 1 to 3%. Nearing 2-3% in my opinion. That state itself is pretty close. Donald Trump is going to do well, though. You really can't expect Bernie Sanders to have a lot of minority turnout. He's definitely going to do a little bit better appealing to the white working class compared to African-American voters, which can be a surprise to some. But if you look at his Democratic primary performance, he isn't too popular in the South either, even against someone like Joe Biden. And if we're looking, North Carolina is probably going to be a Republican state regardless of who the Democratic nominee is. But there are some Democratic states that I'm leaving out now. States like Virginia and New Mexico that are going to be considered likely states. These are both states that went for Hillary Clinton back in 2016 by over 5%. You can't really expect anything different from Bernie Sanders unless somehow there's another shift in the demographics in New Mexico or Virginia. Both of those you can expect to go by a likely margin in favor of the Democratic Party. So that puts the Democrats at 256. Donald Trump at 205, leaves a total of 77 toss-up electoral votes. Now, if you look, these are generally the same toss-up states. There are some states that are still going to be in favor of the Democratic Party. States like Colorado, I would say that one would be a likely Democratic state. And again, even though it is likely, does not mean that this is going to absolutely go for Bernie Sanders. The only ones that I can absolutely say will go to the Democratic nominee, regardless of who it is, are all these safe states. Those are the only ones that I'm 100% sure of. Obviously, things do change. Polling numbers change, approval ratings change. If we're looking at the scenarios, the events, the news changes, a lot of things can change the outcome of elections. But as of right now, this is how I see it going. But good news for Donald Trump. I do expect him to win in the state of Florida by a lean margin, though there are a lot more voters added in the voting rolls. I do not expect Bernie Sanders to do super well in the state of Florida. Florida definitely has been taking a little bit more of a turn in favor of the right. But again, it's not out of reach. But the state of Florida still, I do think, will go to Donald Trump. That puts him at 234. Bernie Sanders is at 265. Donald Trump, I do think, could carry Nebraska's 2nd district. I think that's going to be a lean margin. But Bernie Sanders, I do think, would carry the state of New Hampshire by a likely margin, and this solidifies his win with Maine at large being a likely margin, Maine's 1st district being safe, and Maine's 2nd district being lean. That puts Bernie Sanders at 273 electoral votes, effectively making him the next president of the United States. Right now, Donald Trump's approval rating is actually doing a little bit better. So you can expect his presidential performance should just vary just a little bit a little bit more in favor of him. Ohio right now, I do expect to go to Donald Trump by a lean lean margin. I think this is going to be close, but I don't expect Bernie Sanders to edge this one out. But what I do expect him to edge out is the state of Nevada. I expect that one to go by a lean margin in favor of Bernie Sanders. That puts him at 279. Donald Trump, I do think, will narrowly carry the state of Iowa. I think that one's going to come down to the wire between both of those candidates, and we're going to definitely see a lot more revisions on the state of Iowa and a number of these other lean states, regardless of which party that they're lean for. So that wraps up today's video. Bernie Sanders defeats Donald Trump with 279 electoral votes to Donald Trump's 259. Again, this is not an absolute prediction. Numbers definitely do change, and this is just my pure analytical point of view on this matchup. So thank you guys for watching this video. Comment down suggestions below, and I will see you all tomorrow.